Hey, welcome back. Okay, so we've talked about child sexuality and what a delicate thing that is. We set the context for the nature of pornography as it is in this day and age. I'll talk a bit more about the content of internet porn and how that affects people. First of all, the mythology. You know, not only is it not good for children to see any kind of form of erotica or pornography, but they're also seeing particularly bad pornography with really bad messages in it, misogynist messages and aggressive and violent messages, but also just kind of unrealistic messages about sex which cause confusion. So things like expectations of what the average man or woman in the street will do in the bedroom and will find normal in the bedroom. So as people get a bit older and children get a bit older and they get into puberty and they start to get boyfriends and girlfriends, from a very early age they're having really quite extreme expectations. So young men are thinking that anal sex is the norm, and is bread and butter, and things like gagging the norm, and what's the term for this has slipped out of my mind here, but the other things like a guy finishing sex by ejaculating over the woman's face, all these things, and guys, young men think that women like all this, they really believe that. The other thing about porn is that people get straight to it in porn. You don't have romances, and you don't have courtships, and you don't have dating, and you don't have people asking for somebody else's phone number, and you don't have the subtleties of flirting and all that courtship, as they used to call it, all those kinds of things. People go bang straight to it, and young people as they're getting towards puberty and getting towards or beyond puberty and towards sexual age, they're getting the messages that people just do sex at the drop of a hat, and that things like nudity will in itself will arouse a woman and make her want to have sex with you. And literally there are young guys that are going out in semi-public places naked or exposing themselves or masturbating towards women that are walking past, thinking that the women are going to love this and are going to want to have sex with them, and of course the women are traumatized by it. It's horrific. So this is the false message that pornography is giving, and the problem is it's in a vacuum because sex education isn't very good. Now I kind of have since moving to New Zealand, I've had a bit more of a kind of an international kind of perspective on things. So different countries, some are better and some are worse in this respect. So some countries have very good sex education. There's a culture where the parents talk to children about sex, or somebody does. Some cultures, the schools take that on board, and they do that better than others. So, my experience is sex education can go from, very good to non-existent. So there's an absence of proper education about sex. So therefore, the kids, from children to teens are going and getting their education from internet pornography, which is the worst possible place that you can get sexual education. You're not even going to get kind of proper concept of anatomy, because you're going to see kind of actors that have guys with particularly large penises, women with particularly large breasts, and a certain kind of genitalia. You're going to see shaved genitalia for women as the norm. So guys, young guys are actually quite shocked. Some guys, we actually come across some young guys that don't know that women have pubic hair. They don't know. This is how bad this is. This is how, I'm not kidding here, There's concrete examples of this, and I'm aware of just a tiny, tiny tip of the iceberg. Okay, so what we are all doing as a culture is we are sending our children to internet pornography to get their sexual education. We might not think we are, but by default we are, and that's absolutely terrifying. Okay, now the other factor, and I may get this all covered in this one video, we may go to a final part here, I do tend to find that videos stretch into more and more parts because I get passionate and like talking about these things. I try and keep them concise so that so that you can listen to them. One of the things, there's a guy called Gary Wilson, and I'll put a link to some of his work, but he's done research into the effects of high-speed pornography on the brain. Okay, and it's very specifically high-speed pornography. It's not the old school Penthouse or the old school VHS videos. It's internet high-speed pornography, and the fact that somebody can go through a range of images or a range of videos in a very short space of time and constantly be so what the kind of the mindset that people get into and they're using this pornography is they'll look at an image, they'll be very aroused, they'll be near the point of climax, but they'll think, oh, this image is good, but it's not quite the right image I want to come on. So they will flick to the next one, and then they'll flick to the next one, and they'll flick to the next one. So the brain is overloaded with a huge dopamine rush of this massive images, this massive sexual stimulation. You think people, going back in history, people never, human beings have never had that intensity of sexual stimulation. It's a complete overload. So it has a very profound physiological, measurable effect upon the brain, and it's really frightening. Okay, and I suppose the analogy I use for this is harking back to my child. I feel like I'm 100 years old, and I'm harking back to some sort of golden pastoral age here. But I remember as a kid, we used to go off on our bikes and explore, and sometimes we'd pass a field with horses in, and liking animals and stuff, we'd go up to the edge of the field and see if the horses would come over, and often the grass that's growing just beyond the field is much taller and richer than the grass that's in the field, because the horse has been chomping on it, and we feed the horse with grass, and they'd love all that. And I remember one day, one of our gang had some polo mints. So for those of you not in the UK, they're kind of small, kind of round mints with holes in that are very popular in the UK. And horses love them, and so this guy happened to have a packet of polo mints on him. He gave this horse polo mint, and it didn't want any grass from us. No longer interested in grass. No, I just want more polo mints. And he was kind of zoned in on the guy with the polo mints. And if this horse could talk, he was saying, "Give me more of those polo mints." That is what kind of internet porn does to the brain. And what it does, kind of by having this kind of dopamine effect, by giving too much stimulation, it numbs the brain effectively. That's not necessarily the correct kind of medical way of looking at it, but this is the functional way of looking at it. Is it kind of so all the kind of everyday pleasures, the simple pleasures in life, like pleasures from food, or pleasures from being with your friends, or pleasures from looking at a sunset, or reading a book, or any of the kind of the many simple pleasures of life become dulled. And the intensity of them drops. These things don't give us the same pleasure that they do for a brain that has been affected by this pornography over a certain period of time. Which is horrible, isn't it? It's a horrible thing. So their threshold for stimulation is higher, so they're constantly craving more stimulation, which means they use porn more, or they go to more extreme porn. Excuse me, another swig of lubrication. Now the other effect, and this is something I think every young man needs to be told this, that if for people that use lots of internet porn, and people do escalate, we'll talk about that in a while, eventually they come to a point where they are incapable of making love to a partner, because a partner can never, much as they can be wonderful, and much as sex is a beautiful, amazing thing, and it can be so much more rich and amazing than porn can ever be, in a kind of three-dimensional real way. Because of the extent of the stimulation from the pornography, being with a partner doesn't cut it anymore. Okay, so what's happening is guys, they can't get an erection when they're with a partner, which is terrifying. And also, I think the other side of this is that porn is easy, whereas sex, you have to kind of cross a bit of an intimacy barrier with sex. With sex, you have to kind of show up. You have to kind of make an effort. You have to kind of be present. You have to be giving. But with the internet, you don't have to be giving. You don't have to be generous. You don't have to worry about a partner's orgasm or pleasure, or whether you're hurting them, whether you're doing the wrong thing. It's, there's no strings, So it requires far less effort. So what's happening is young guys, and interestingly in Japan, you know, there's this thing, isn't there, that kind of young guys are hardly having sex now. It's not happening. Well, maybe that's a good thing because it'll keep the population down, because that's another issue, I guess. But it's, you know, I think it's pretty horrific. And what they found is that young you know, guys have to have a long period of pornography abstinence before they're able to become aroused with a partner. So yeah, really scary stuff. Okay, so I think we've covered most of what I want to cover here, but I do want to talk about escalation, and I also want to touch upon the darkest end of the pornography spectrum. So I quite like that idea of a pornography spectrum, that, you know, maybe self-made non-exploitative pornography and erotica is on the or maybe fiction maybe is on the, you know, one side of the pornography spectrum, and then some of the darker things are on the other side. So we'll finish up in one more episode, and we'll talk about some of the extremes, and also this is another really scary one, I'm afraid. We're going to talk about the dangers of escalating into those extremes. So we'll see you very soon. Thanks very much. Rangi Mari.